Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone else listening, welcome back to Commissions Open Season 2. Character design for the set by Doida Flower on Twitter. Promotional art by Andromeda_Snow on Twitter. Icon created by Shy Starfall. Commissions Open logo created by Melodic Scavenger. And tonight's guest, the lead bassist behind the band Lindby, and the Dungeon Maestro for the podcast bomBARDed. It's Kyle Classett. And here's your host, Doc Conrad. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Commissions Open, an interview podcast all about art and the digital age. Here you can hear the processes, stories, and lives of talented artists, voice actors, video creators, editors, musicians, and many other talented creators in the era of online work. I am your host, Doc Conrad, and today I have one of my most anticipated guests that I personally have been I've been wanting to go ahead and get you on this for a little bit. Do you want me to just go ahead and call you Kyle? Your last name's totally fine. Kyle Classett, is that fine?
Yeah, Kyle Classett, Dungeon Maestro Kyle. You know.
Yeah, Dungeon Maestro Kyle. Yeah. You are one of the biggest inspirations for my D&D campaigns ever, and have been a absolutely wonderful guest along my many pizza delivery trips to Domino's when I worked for them. Dungeon Maestro Kyle, how you doing, man? How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. You know, we're staying. Currently, we're in the midst of the whole quarantine and everything, so we're staying safe. You know, the podcast is recording remotely right now, which is working out rather well, all things considered. But I'm doing well, you know, considering everything that's going on. So thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing very all right. This is a surreal experience for me, especially. I was telling you a little bit beforehand. Your work involved with not only your band, which I've enjoyed. I've dabbled in listening to your podcast, which I've enjoyed thoroughly, and your work as a DM has greatly inspired me. But that being said, why don't we go ahead and, to everybody who doesn't know who you are, what is it that you do?
Well, I DM a podcast called bomBARDed that I do with my bandmates. We're part of the band Lindby, but honestly, the podcast has kind of overshadowed that aspect, which is totally fine. It's really all part of it. We really wanted to get our music out there. But to get back on track, what we do is my bandmates, they all three play bards in D&D, and it's a multi-class thing just to give it a little bit of variety. But we bring our instruments to the table, and every episode we have dice with chords on them. They're the 8-sided dice, and we roll those dice to see what chords we have to use in a new composition. So every episode you basically get a new song, and of course any backing music you hear in the podcast is composed by Spurrier. So it's all music oriented. We really wanted to gel the worlds of music and D&D together, and of course bards being bards. Not that all bards are only musical bards. In my podcast there are interpretive dance bards. Not that we really it's mentioned, it's not really focused on, but
it's hard to go ahead and express in an audio format interpretive dance, but yes,
exactly. I'll try my best when it comes around to it, but when we really get into the thick of it, the music aspect of the podcast is first and foremost hand in hand with D&D. So it's just, just imagine like, a meme where two people are holding hands and one's labeled D&D and one's labeled music, and then in between them it says bomBARDed.
It's a very much an inspiring podcast, I must say, because in my personal D&D campaign, like I mentioned earlier, it was inspired by this whole campaign. We have, in fact, 3 of the other guests that have been on this show are actually members of my campaign. And
nice.
they have all they all my personal campaign is all bards as well, inspired by your work. So this is this is sort of like a cyclical moment, if you will, mostly because like from that we move from the idea of getting almost like every single person who like does creative outlets inside of it, wanting to create a bard college that like we've sort of moved from there, and we've it's hard to go and fully explain, but like it's right. So surreal to go and hear about this. But why don't we go ahead and focus back up on you? There's you do a lot behind the scenes of running a campaign, running a podcast, making the music, making everything. How is it that you got to know everybody behind the band Lindby and everybody behind bomBARDed? Like how was that all, how did you all meet?
Well, we all met at UTA, University of Texas in Arlington, about 2009. I was actually Allie and I had started dating, which I most people know, some people don't, but Allie and I are actually married. So we've known each other for a long time. Her older brother is one of my oldest friends, and we started dating around 2008, 2009, and she was going to UTA, and I was still going to community college, and I just started, taking classes in music and music theory, ear training, playing in jazz ensembles and stuff with bass. But I wound up going to UTA because that's where Allie was, and then she was in choir with the two Nicks, Goodrich and Spurrier proper. And that's when I got introduced because their bass player dropped out. And Allie told them, well, my boyfriend plays bass, and that's kind of how everything started. I went up there, hung out with them, played bass in a practice. They handed me chord changes. And luckily I had gotten into that kind of music playing where it's just like, yeah, here's some chords, follow the rhythm. And I was at least adept enough to be able to pull that off, even though I'd only been doing it for less than a year. Because prior to that, it was all ear and feeling things out, But no, that's kind of how everything came to be. We were all in choir together at UTA and got our degrees in music from UTA. So that's kind of the birthplace of the form that Lindby is currently. Of course, the two Nicks, they had met in like junior high, and that's kind of when they first started Lindby. Before that, I think they had called it, what was it, Five in the Eye, as reference to like, slapping someone across the face.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they had been doing the band for a while, and so when I came in, they had all this music that I got to learn, and it was really cool because they were a different type of musicians to play with, and it really actually made me better by playing with them. So like it was great because I had to step up, which was a lot of fun for me and made me just a better bass player altogether and a better musician, really. And I mean, they were just fantastic people right off the bat, and it kind of just clicked. So so that's where everything began, was UTA, good old Arlington, Texas.
It's interesting. I actually interviewed somebody from the University of Arlington, Texas.
Oh, really?
Chelsea, yeah, she's a current student there, Chelsea Ackman. She's absolutely a wonderful joy to go and talk with, and she does animation and digital art. I have to share her stuff. You're an alumni, so it's interesting to go and hear that like it sort of works back in there. Yeah. So that's how you pretty much started with Lindby. You got to go ahead and know Allie and Goodrich and Spurrier and everybody. That's how everybody met in terms of like the band. And you played for how long did you play before you made how long did you play in the band before you decided to go and make the podcast? Like everything leading up from there, like when you joined to like, you know what, I think we're gonna go ahead and try this sort of thing with the podcast. How long a point was that?
Right. I think we dropped the podcast. I think the podcast we started releasing episodes in 2017, was it? Maybe it was 2018. I can't. It's been such a whirlwind that I'm having a hard time remembering.
I think it might have been 2017, but yeah.
2017 sounds about right, because I think it was 2 years this past year, which was 2019. So, whoa, that's wild. Essentially that would be 8 years if we're saying 2009 was when I joined up. So we had been playing together for a good long time, which, we helped us develop a rapport with each other, and we had gotten to know each other, and really kind of our friendships had really gelled. There's a lot of life experiences that we had together, marriages and everything like that. And, moving and helping each other through different points in our life and experiencing those kind of things together. So not to mention just playing way too many dive bars together, you kind of nothing like sitting out back of a dive bar around midnight. I remember one time we played 2 shows in one day, and we were just wiped by the end of it. Spurrier and I were sitting out back of this. It's no longer there anymore, but it was called the Cellar. And it was literally a hole in the ground. You walk down these stairs from this street near TCU, and dude, it was one of our stomping grounds back in the day. But it's filled in with cement now. But we were sitting out back of that place, and just like pretty much leaned up against a wall, passing out, because we had performed earlier in the day and then later in the day, and we were just spent. So moments like that really helped bond things. But yeah, 8 years before the podcast officially started. But we had been talking about doing the podcast for roughly about maybe half to 3/4 of a year before we started putting episodes out, just because we were playing monthly in a game. Our first time playing D&D together, I brought it to the table because it had been so long. I had this weird hiatus from D&D, and not because I didn't want to play. It's just it kind of fell to the wayside in lieu of everything else. And I brought it back, and I was like, hey, I remember 3.5. I still had some of the books, so I busted those out. I remember 3.5 being very involved as far as character creation goes. There were too many nights in high school where we would spend the entire night making characters, and then by the end of it, we were like, we're too tired to play. We'll play with these next week.
I remember that too.
Yeah, so I made their characters and gave them a little bit of backstory, something to just start them off, those pre-gen kind of ideas, and started going with something, a little bit of homebrew storyline. And we were doing this lock-in one summer, and it was just us. Spurrier's parents were out of town, so we were over at their house, and we spent the entire weekend over there and chilled, wrote music, played music, and played D&D. And that was kind of our first time playing D&D. And then we had a little bit of time in between that because scheduling is complicated. But once we finally got back into it, that's when I made the switch over to 5E. We had a buddy of ours, Nolan, who was coming over and playing too. He's part of a band called the Hendersons, which Spurrier actually plays piano in. I definitely recommend their music. Go check them out. The Hendersons on, they probably have it on Bandcamp and hopefully on Spotify because their stuff's really good. But yeah, so we started playing that, and then Spurrier was playing a bard character in that, and he was bringing like this little kalimba or a thumb piano to the table. And we started joking around. It's like, oh, what if we were all bards? And we had been listening to the Adventure Zone at that point. And I was already in my head. I was like, man, that seems like a lot of fun. It'd be really cool. And then we all started talking about it. And then it was like, well, what if we were all bards? And then it was like, well, what if we also wrote a song every episode? Because Spurrier had actually bought chord dice to do this sort of aleatoric music where it's just like you just roll the dice and you see what you get and you kind of go with that. Not only does he have chord dice, he also has stuff for like extensions, like getting into 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 12ths, 13ths, all that sweet jazz theory kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and that's kind of when the idea sparked, and we were like, okay, let's start fleshing this out. And so that's when we started spending that good, half to 3/4 of a year really putting pen to paper and testing concepts. I mean, I think most people do like a 0 episode. We probably did like a 0, a 0.25, a half, and a 3/4 episode testing things out to make sure it was like a proof of concept for us, trying to make sure that when we got into this, that it wasn't going to just totally be a bust.
Mm-hmm. And your preparation has been like one of the biggest things involved with like working with your players and creating a narrative storyline. And I can see the inspiration coming in from like the Adventure Zone especially. And that's actually how I got introduced to you. I mentioned earlier that like I heard your ad on the Adventure Zone from not the ad, but like the billboard. And Griffin seemed like so genuinely like interested, and I was just like, all right, I'll go ahead and give this a shot. This seems interesting. And I never
bless that sweet boy.
Bless that sweet boy. I never considered like listening. It's so lucky because sometimes sometimes I skip through some of those ads as well, just to like go ahead and be like, I want to get to the episode proper, like I want to go and hear it. And I'm so lucky that I didn't for yours, because it has brought me like your episodes have brought me so much joy, and I'd love to go ahead and have you talk about the behind the scenes of which you've worked on it. You said you like did multiple sessions in which you like want to get things started and you want to make sure like this is proper, this is how we want to do it right. Was it like a test of like doing things in like a narrative sense? Was it like testing out characters and how you did it? Like what did those early sessions look and sound like?
The early sessions were more so testing out the technical side of it, whether recording, all the recording stuff, because we understood like that was like first and foremost one of the most important things is, you know, a good audio quality. You know, not that I think that should stop people. Like, you know, if you got something to record, get out there and record it. Somebody out there is going to want to listen to it. I fully promote that. And, you know, if you get more of a following, you can develop that gear. We were fortunate enough that, you know, Goodrich and I both worked for a music company, which shall remain nameless for the time being. Mm-hmm. And that permitted us to, you know, get discounts on gear and everything. And so Goodrich had built up a really good studio, and we were recording ourselves already as a band. So we had all of this gear to use. So we already had a pretty good setup as far as, you know, microphones and interfaces and just, you know, having good recording gear. So that was really what we were testing out, is just to see like how well that would work, what it would sound like. Because, I mean, yes, a DM puts in a lot of work, but I'll be honest in saying that I've never been part of a DM, or I've never been part of a D&D game where I feel like other people are doing equal or more work. But bomBARDed is definitely that. Goodrich, the amount of time he puts into editing things and listening through things, I feel like my preparation pales in comparison to that. And I'd say the same for Spurrier and the compositional work that he does. And Allie, the time that she puts into, she works on our website and uploads fan art and takes care of transcripts with the people that we hired to do that and reads over them. So everyone's really pulling, you know, I would say an equal load, if not more than I do. Cause I mean, like I really flow it week to, you know, episode to episode. Really. I kind of wait and see. Cause early on, I prepped way too much early on. I treated it like a normal D&D game. And then after the first few episodes, I was like, okay, I can't prep that far out. These bards going to get wild. So, you know, and for me, my writing style is the biggest thing that I have worked on over the course of the podcast. And I feel like I finally settled into a groove as far as how I write for the podcast, which I'd probably say this is maybe the fourth or fifth version of how I do things. So, but that was probably the biggest hurdle for me, was getting past it, me wanting to have like, you know, almost that real Critical Role feel where it's like, no, everything is, you know, that's D&D. That is D&D at its core, and this is how we're playing. And then we realized, you know, for what we're doing, it can't be that. And of course, we all had our different ideas of how we were going to go about it. And so that was kind of one thing that I think we weren't really clear on when we went into it. And then when we got into it, we were like, oh, okay, so we need to have this conversation, and we need to discuss how our table is going to work and how the show is going to be perceived. So that was one of the things that really helped out in the earlier episodes, was, you know, getting our footing and feeling that out, and really, you know, kind of getting our own tone down. So those early episodes, and even the pre-podcast episodes really helped out. I mean, we fleshed out things like combat and, you know, trying to do a song and how, you know, doing the song spells would work, and not only just the rolling of the chord dice ones, but the ones that they perform that are just typical D&D songs that we do parody covers on. Mm-hmm. So all of that is a huge boon to us getting our feet under us.
So a lot of the I'd say that a lot of your work involved is is more or less like focused on the campaign, on D&D itself, and being the dungeon master, whereas all the other ones have their own individual positions in making the podcast sort of go ahead and grow further, and they're much more on the technical end, as you're more of the story end. So it really does. I'm guessing it really helps to have those sort of like, not have everybody lean on one person to focus on all those sort of things. They're all putting in their weight in behind it, and it really helps out with like creating a proper, like, it helps enhance your storytelling, especially with the music in the background and the work that you do inside of that, and having a chance to go ahead and play with all the players, and working alongside with the three of them like literally create a song from the core dice. They write it out, and they script it out. Why don't you go ahead and talk about things involved, like that sort of thing as well, like the way that they make music, and the way that you are either you help, or you like take a step back and let them do things. Like, how does that sort of play out?
I typically take a step back personally, but they all do really well. I mean, most of the times, once we get the chords, Spurrier, being a composer and everything, stuff just kind of like flows out of him in an awesomely amazing way. And he will just come up with something, and then, either it's like, oh, well, we like this aspect of it, or, we like the whole thing. And then Goodrich and Alley start talking about lyrics, and really all of that depends on whether they're doing a magic-oriented song or just doing a normal performance. And typically, of course, if it's a magic song, I will stay out of it. I come in at the end and I play bass if they need me to. Sometimes Spurrier does like a synth bass thing, which, that's when the only reason I think I beat Breath of the Wild was because of, them having to write songs and me just getting to kick back, which was great, So, but I still have a lot of fun being able to come in and lay down a bass line, because that's all I've really ever done. I've written a handful of songs myself for the podcast and for the band, but I really do enjoy and love playing bass. So the fact that I get to come in and, write bass lines for the music that they create is a lot of fun for me. Sometimes Spurrier comes up with like this bass idea, and that was pun intentional. It is a bass idea, but it's also a bass idea. So he comes up with this bass line, and he's like, here's what I'm thinking. I'm like, cool, can I mess around with it? And Spurrier is so great about just being like, yes, here's the recipe, make it your own. And so we kind of throw things around in the kitchen of bomBARDed, and once it comes out, usually everything turns out pretty good. I don't think we've, surprisingly enough, we have not had a song that we finished and felt like, meh. We've all felt pretty good about the song once it's all said and done. So, but yeah, no, that process is really grown and developed over time. And, sometimes a song requires a little bit more time than we have. And, we will step away from the recording booths and sit with it and really let itself flesh out and give it some time. And then we'll come back and we'll finish the episode. Cause, originally my thought process was, I wanted them to write a song in 15 minutes or less, just to be like, yeah, I mean, just to keep it in that real world feel. Again, me trying to be like, oh, D&D is D&D, ha ha ha. But trying to give it that potential for it to not be a good song. And that was one of the conversations that we had early on. And I was like, okay, well, that's a fair point. Why would we want to put out like, a bad song? That doesn't make sense. Okay, Kyle, you can go ahead and wind that one off. So, but really it's been great, because, a lot of really good tunes have come out of it, and seeing how people react to some of the music, some of those reactions are, I lose words, because people are just so kind, and it's amazing how much they love what we put out. So it's very endearing, and knowing that people respond and relate and connect to our music in such a way really, really puts a fuel in my fire to want to deliver that kind of content. And I think it does for the bards as well. So yeah, the writing process has become a phenomenal part of it. And I do sit back and I'm hands off with it, mainly so, if it comes down to the magical side, I don't feel like I'm influenced. I keep it very, very objective. I think that's right. Yeah. I'm not subjective. I'm objective.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you know,
I always get this.
you're totally right in that regard. You don't want to go ahead and influence the you don't want to go ahead and influence it so that way it causes like, oh, I made the magic do this so that way it works out for my narrative. It's like what they want to do, so it makes sense.
Exactly, and I do that sometimes when they're performing with NPCs because I want to remain objective as an NPC and just be like, like I think in the second episode where they write the Silk Grove song for Wesley, and Wesley's just like, oh, okay, I mean, you just said one word and then my name at the end. Great, I guess here's your money. Cool. So. So yeah, keeping that kind of mentality is a lot of fun. And even though I'm kicking back and playing video games or working on something else, they think that I'm not listening, and I let them think that sometimes. I'll have headphones on and I'll hear them say, "Oh, he's not paying attention," when I totally am.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun to keep that in mind.
If you guys are listening to this, he's listening. Don't doubt it. But no, it's so interesting to go ahead and hear about it because there is definitely from the influences that you have on both ends. Because I remember you mentioned before the podcast that you have you work on campaigns as well outside of this as well. You have one that you work on outside of this as well, and compared to like that. Bombarded is a different sort of thing because it's more of a narrative storytelling, and you're right in the regard of you don't want to go ahead and tell. You want to go ahead and have D&D to be a medium in which it's a storytelling aspect with game mechanics thrown in and like the stakes being increased in that regard. But compared to that with regular D&D, where it's like about a showcase of like skill and like fun and like having fun in that regard, there's a difference between like the campaigns, like a full campaign side that you don't record to go ahead and be entertaining versus and like communicating with you and not communicating with your players for like fun tricksy sort of things. Whereas like I'm guessing you take a little bit of time and state like, here are some of the things that I might go ahead and do, and like give them a small peek behind the curtain to let them know like, hey, this is a general sense of what I want to happen, but you don't have to go ahead and follow it exactly. Like there's definitely some cases where you want to go ahead and like work with your players more so in the sort of narrative sense compared to like an actual full-on D&D campaign where the dungeon master is this like this creepy man behind the cardboard cutout and just like doesn't know what you have planning for ahead. You have to communicate with them, especially with everything that they do. So it makes a lot of sense. But why don't you go ahead and talk about your perspective behind the difference between running a campaign for this compared to that of a regular one, because you've touched on a little bit here and there. Is the power out? What's going on? Oh, it's the middle bit. The first order of business is a thank you. Thank you for sticking by this podcast for as many months as you have. I really do appreciate it, and I hope Season 2 is worth the wait. I have 20 guests lined up for this season, and I'll be hopefully taking another break at that point. Hopefully a lot shorter. I want to go ahead and make these breaks shorter in between each time, but I want to make sure that I have time to go ahead and set up the next set of guests before I start uploading them frequently. So, what have I been doing since I've been a little bit busy? Well, I've been streaming on twitch.tv/Dr. Conrad, spelt out DOCTORCONRAD, twitch.tv/Dr. Conrad. I have been streaming Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 10 p.m. EST, and on Saturdays whenever I get the chance for as long as I can possibly do. The reason why I've been doing that is because I've just been having a lot of fun playing video games with my friends, preferably doing a lot of Minecraft. I've been having fun with that, doing pixel art commissions. I'm trying to go ahead and get back into pixel art. And maybe even some Among Us. I've been playing a lot of Among Us with some of the past guests and some other friends that I have along the way. And it's just been a ton of fun. But if you want to go ahead and follow me on there, like I said, twitch.tv/Dr. Conrad. And I'm going to be streaming regularly and after this podcast is live the day of. That's Saturday. And I'll be streaming every Saturday and Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, except for holidays, which I will let you know beforehand. So, with all of that being said, I want to go ahead and thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for the wonderful work that you guys have done with
making either art for me or just listening to the podcasts or telling your friends about it. It has been an absolute blast hearing about you guys enjoying the episodes and the episodes previously in the last season. And I hope that season 2 will be quite a bit of an improvement and a breakthrough in multiple different assets, whether it be numbers-wise, audio quality-wise, everything. I want to make sure that Commissions Open is the best it can be. It's all thanks in part to all of you. All right, I think that's going to be it for this time's middle bit. Let's all go and check back in at what Kyle has to say about the difference between Dungeons & Dragons in terms of podcasting and versus actual play. Also, thanks for not skipping this. All right, bye.
Yeah, so for my Thursday group, I'm running Tomb of Annihilation, Hex Crawler, really grindy, and their travel is a big part of that. And again, early on in the podcast, I was ready to do like, okay, yeah, let's really like have y'all experience travel. But as I went along, I realized, well, that's not the most interesting. Yes, things happen when you travel. That's a given. And I took the switch from, wanting to focus on like, okay, yeah, what happens this day of travel, second day of travel, third day of travel. And I decided to cut that aspect of it. Unless, and instead of, making it like that, I would say, okay, there's one scene you go and there's one thing that happens, like very much when they are, when they're headed to the Discordant Fields, like I think that's the late 20-ish episodes, in the late 20s or so, early 30s, where they are headed to the Discordant Fields. Yes, there's travel involved in that, but there's only one scene that matters in the whole getting there process. And it's deciding to, pick and choose your moments of, okay, what they come across somebody. Yes, I don't have to worry what happens on the other days of travel if there is anything. And I could roll for a random encounter or something like that, but I don't want to stall the narrative because that random encounter, sometimes it just doesn't do anything. Sometimes you just come across like, a little horde of goblins and that's all there is to it. And it's not really narratively tied to what's happening in the story. So I've decided to forego that intense travel aspect that I have with my Thursday night group. Just because that it doesn't fit with the aesthetic of the show, but I still enjoy. I mean, with my Thursday night group, like I said, we've been playing that game for well over, long enough for me to forget how long we've been playing it. So it's been easily a year and a half, maybe getting close to 2 years in August or October. But I've done the random encounter thing with them, and there's times where it's like, all right, I'm working on the fly, and I'll roll it up, and it's like, all right, this is happening now. And that day to day, because that is a survival oriented campaign, and there is a ticking clock involved with it, that creates the necessity for that kind of play. So, and there may be a time where I'm doing a D&D session that's not bomBARDed, where I will forego travel as well. If the storyline that's going on there doesn't hinge on the amount of time it takes you to get from point A to point B, I'll hand wave travel. I have no problem doing it. And I think that's one thing as a DM is you have to pick and choose your battles and what you choose to focus on. Especially knowing the style of play that your players enjoy and being able to focus in on those things. That's one conversation that, I have with anybody that I start getting into a D&D game with is, what about the game do you love? Is it combat or role playing? Do you like, a little bit of subterfuge and intrigue? You get a feel for your players and you really kind of lean towards that because that's what's going to keep them tied into the game. That's what's going to keep things rolling. And, I have players that, just like combat. That's totally fine. They don't get into the role playing and everything, but it's your job to juggle those two, give them a little bit of combat, or, it doesn't even have to be combat. I really love the chase mechanic that they provide in the Dungeon Master's Guide. That is one of my favorite things. And the first time that I used it, was in the not Basim episodes where they're running out of those ruins. And that's not necessarily a chase as more as it is an escape. I kind of took the mechanic of that and I was like, okay, well, they're not pursuing something, but they are running from something. So you can still take the mechanic and apply it and just switch it up a little bit. So that's one of those things, like getting to know those little tools and mechanics that Wizards provides you and taking them and making them your own. That's another fun part for me, is fleshing that kind of stuff out. But yeah, no, I mean, it's really just getting a feel for the players at the table and getting a feel for the table itself and what kind of story you're trying to tell. You going for something nitty gritty? Get into the details of it and really flesh that out. Have your ranger count their arrows and, let them know, like, hey, yeah, you can only recover half of your arrows because the ones that missed, like, hit a stone and broke. Give them those kind of details, or, just say, hey, you know what? Anytime you wind up getting into town, we don't have to go through a shopping montage. More than likely, you're going to re-up your gear. So just let me know, hey, I'm going to re-up some gear. Write it in and count down the coin that it takes, and we can hand wave the interaction. Unless you really want to talk to a shopkeeper about something specific. If you're just getting general goods, I'll hand wave that. Yeah, you can get them. Totally cool. But is there something specific you're looking for? Well, then maybe, Farabar has some peculiar deals going on, and maybe even something nefarious going on behind the counter that only certain persuasive people are entitled to.
Mm-hmm. And I love hearing about that, because there's so many different ways to go ahead and DM a campaign, especially, and you are getting a taste of, like, you I'm guessing have plenty of experience with it, because you said you started, like, how long ago did you start doing campaigning? You said it was like in 2000. You said you started in college, or was it like a little bit past that?
Well, the first time I played D&D, my older brother Robbie introduced it to me after he had moved back from Oregon, and I was 14. And he did a one-on-one thing with me. It was really cool. I've used his the dungeon layout that I recall, because I can't recall every detail. I don't remember my first character's name. I know he was a human fighter because I wanted a sword and board. That was like the ideal fantasy, is just sword and board. And I still love playing a human fighter to this day. Mm-hmm. I'm not ashamed of it. I know they get a lot of flack, but hey, you know what? I know what I like, and I'll go with it. But no, it's one of these things where, like, I had to scale this cliff to get to this. There was a MacGuffin, of course. Had to scale this cliff to get to this cave. And as I made my way through and found it, it was hidden in this room way down. But the first room, I remember the first room. It was just this open little cavernous area, and there was a large hole in the center of it where a strong gust of wind was being emitted from. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to jump down a hole. So that just seems, foolhardy. So I continued on. And by the end of the little, cave system that he had planned out, I'd got the MacGuffin, but it triggered this trap and the cave started to collapse in on itself. Well, nearby, there was a room where there's a hole in the ceiling and there's this large gust of wind just going up. So I rode that up to the top of the cave, back to the first room, jumped out as the cave was imploding, sending me flying over the edge. And I'm pretty much like 100 feet above this forest. Sure death. And I say, okay, I'm going to take my grappling hook and rope, throw it back behind me. And he's like, roll. And I rolled well because I rolled well enough not to die. But the grappling hook made contact. I wound up pulling my arm out of my socket, and, content warning for, that kind of stuff. Sorry. But, and hurt myself, but I survived. And it was it's being the first memory. It was so memorable. But that was 14. And then after that, it was high school that I got into it with an official group of friends. One of my buddies that was a senior in choir, he asked me, he's like, hey, do you like D&D? And I was like, yeah, I've only played like a handful of times. He's like, well, do you like Star Wars? I was like, well, yeah, I like Star Wars. He's like, well, we're doing a Star Wars role-playing game. And then I realized, oh, it's not just D&D. There's so much more out there. And that was kind of, it all kicked off probably right around 14, 15 for me. And through high school, I played pretty heavily most weekends. And there was a comic book shop in my town. It was small and building up, but we didn't really run any of the written modules or any campaigns like that. Everything was always homebrewed except for like classes and stuff. So, and for some reason, I always wound up falling into the role of being the DM. Not always. There was a few times here and there I got to play, but for some reason, I writing little stories and things like that kind of just came to me. I was like, oh, this is cool. This is cool. And I would always, I'm still bad about this day. And I don't want to say bad because I think people should do it. Steal from your influences. There's nothing wrong with that. In music, we say that mimicry is the highest form of flattery. Mm-hmm. So that is an aspect that I subscribe to, still to this day, is just taking stuff from, movies, books, TV shows, any kind of medium that you are inspired by and working it into what you're doing. I've said this before, I believe, in other interviews and talking with people, but the arc that happens after they get back from the Discordant Fields, where this ooze has taken over the school and everything. Mm-hmm. That whole arc is inspired by one episode of Cowboy Bebop called Toys in the Attic.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. I heard this whole thing and I'm just like, this sounds somewhat familiar. And then and like Cowboy Bebop. Oh man, I've always wanted to go ahead and like, I need to finish the last 2 episodes. But I remember watching that. I remember watching that episode a while back. And now that you mention it, like, that is like heavily inspired by that whole arc of like finding this thing that lives inside the school and then like is causing awful things to happen, and like finding it, eventually like hunting it down, tracking it down, taking care of it, dealing with it entirely, and hopefully like saving everybody else involved. Like it's very much like inspired by that. I could definitely see it, and it came from like a great set of moments with like you got to introduce different characters to like to the party, and like get to see a different side of them and like how the things work in the school. Beside like what the normal things go on, because they have to go out and explore everything. So it really showed like a lot of different ways, and like you took it in one way and took an inspiration, but like turned it into something else, and it just showed how like those things can, like, when applied to your own individual thing, major inspirations can cause like great storytelling moments, especially from that. And I'm guessing that episode could even be inspired by like different things involved with like, I don't know, like Thing-ish, like this thing that like runs around and crawls around and like not as drastic, but like kills people, and like you have to like don't know who to trust. Could they be like infected or whatnot, or like like zombie movies? Like you have a ton of things to go in there, but like, yeah, go ahead and continue on with like your inspiration stuff. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, like the funniest thing about that Cowboy Bebop episode is that it was all because you forgot about some food you left in the fridge, and I thought that was hilarious. And I was like, well, I got a person who likes snacks, and so I love dropping breadcrumbs. That's another thing. Leaving, like the meteor in episode 4 leading into the whole arc out in Basim. And then, when they got back to the school, like episodes 5 through 7, where it starts talking about them creating that refrigerator area down there. That's, I had that all planned out, from early on. Like I said, I did a lot of long form planning when we first started the podcast, and I had a lot of ideas. And now I was like, okay, well, I expected to get to those things a lot sooner, but that was not the case. Like I did not imagine that everything up through the Basim arc would be 20 plus episodes. I was thinking, 10 episodes, we'll be through it, no problem. But lo and behold, that is not the case, which is nice because it's, it pads out the content. And I do believe in letting the players really drive the narrative. That's something that's important to me. There's a time and a place for railroading a character, and there's a way you can do it that makes it seem like you're not doing it. The case in point, and I always bring this up as an example, in the first episode, they have to go and they have to get Razzle new strings for his guitar. And when I give them 3 options whenever they get to the town, it's like, oh, well, you could go to Sundance and you could check out this shop. You could go to the dwarves and check out this new metal that they found. Or, this dude Wesley shows up and is like, hey, I might be able to help you out. So that gives them 3 opportunities to go and get what they need. Now, me as the DM, knowing my characters and the story that their backstory, I knew because of Razzle's backstory, they weren't going to go see the dwarves. That wasn't the case. So really, I've made 3 options, actually 2. And could they have gone to Sundance? Yeah, totally. I could have worked with that. Wouldn't have been a problem. I would have had some time to figure some things out because there would have been travel involved. So that would have given me a little bit of breathing room. So I pretty much eliminated it down to a 50-50 chance and hinged my bets on them going with Wesley, which worked out. So it's this illusion of choice that you offer your characters. And, if they go the other way, then so be it. That's what they're going to do. And you've got to work with it. It's your responsibility as the dungeon master or game master to flow with that. And so it's kind of like railroading, but not really.
It's interesting to go and hear that, because it's not something that you normally like consider, especially because of like as somebody who's like the DM of the campaign, like to everybody else it's like, oh, they could have just done this, but they did this instead, and it's so cool that how you had all those things planned out in that regard. But you really, like, to the audience listener, like, they were never going to go pick that option, so it's like you feel like your role's a lot more like fully built out in that regard. So it's interesting to go and hear this sort of thing. And I'd love to go ahead and let's go ahead and take a step a little bit in a different direction. We've talked a lot about you running the campaign and a lot of the work that you've done in that regard, and we've talked a bit about everything involved with like you wanting to go ahead and eventually create this podcast. You've made you've worked in music inside of the band Lindby, but why don't we go ahead and talk about your early inspirations of why you wanted to get into music in general? Because we heard a little bit about you getting into D&D, but the other aspect of that, of course, is the music end. How did you first get into it?
Well, I've been musically involved for, a good portion of my life. My mom was very supportive, especially starting off early with like recorder and whatnot. She was always down to help me learn things at home. Like one of the first things I remember learning on recorder was George of the Jungle, because Brendan Fraser, hilarious. And George of the Jungle is a fantastic movie and super funny. I loved it. Mm-hmm. But so that was early on. She was very supportive of that. Not only that, she did a lot of the kids choir stuff at our church, and did like little church musicals and stuff that I was involved in. So it was, I've always been doing something musical, but in middle school I got into choir and started doing that. And then in high school is when I was taking some piano lessons throughout middle school, and I should be better about just being a good piano player at this point, but really for some reason I wasn't jazzed about it necessarily. Mm-hmm. So it was that, and she had a guitar. I tried picking up guitar and I was like, oh, too many strings. But then one time at a friend's birthday party, there was a bass there, and I picked it up and it was missing a string, and I was like, well, I can tell there's supposed to be a 4th string, but this seems like the right number for me. I like 4. 4 seems good. Mm-hmm. And so I talked my mom into buying me a bass kit. It's an Ibanez starter kit. Came with like, a case, a little amplifier, which I still have. I'd still have the bass if I didn't think that I could mod it into a fretless myself, which I totally ruined my first bass, which is fine. It's not like I need it, but it would still be cool to have. But unfortunately, yeah, I totally trashed that thing out trying to modify it myself. But yeah, so she was like, okay, this is the last instrument I'm going to buy you. And I was like, okay. She's like, so if you don't stick with it, and you want to try anything else, it's on you. And luckily, here I am, 18 years later, still playing bass, and it being my primary instrument, and having gone and taking lessons for it in school and everything. And but playing bass, it's not like I picked up bass because I was, I had friends that were in a band or something. I just picked up bass because I thought it was an instrument I could play, and I always enjoyed the low end of music and hearing bass lines and everything. So, I mean, my first 6 months of playing bass was me sitting in my room by myself, listening through like Green Day, Blink 182, Incubus, and a bunch of other like, bands that had really good bass line, and just learning them. And that's how I started playing bass, was by learning other people's bass lines and just going with that. And then, about after like 6 or 7 months, I went and hung out with some friends of a friend for the first time. I mean, I knew the dudes, but they weren't in my normal circle. So this friend of mine who I was, in choir with me and everything, took me over there. We hung out. It was the first time I experimented with, underage drinking, which you shouldn't do, but it happened. So that was my first experience. I brought my bass over and we played through some of their stuff, and they were just like, okay, yeah, it's cool. We spent the rest of the night just partying and got to know each other a little bit better. And they were all like, okay, yeah, if you can learn this one Rage Against the Machine song, I think it was Take the Power Back. It's like that song. I think that's Take the Power Back.
I think so.
But they were like, okay, learn that, and next time we hang out, if you can play it, you're in. Well, I went home the next day, and that's what I did, because sitting in my room and learning a bass line is all I had done. So I learned it in like a couple of days and got it under my fingers. And then like a couple of days later, one of them, the guitarist Michael, was hanging out with my connected buddy Jordan, who took me over there. And I was like, oh, hey, I got that bass line down. He's like, no way. I was like, yeah, dude, check it out. And I had my bass with me and pulled it out and played it. And he was like, damn, all right. And that was that. And that's when I got in my first band in high school. And I played with those fellers for a good while before I decided, like, I needed to go to Arlington, and I was pursuing music a little bit heavily. And, we had a great time together, and I needed to make a change, because there are some life things happening that it was like, okay, if I don't change this, I can see myself going down a very, very like not good path. So let me change my life real quick and go to school. And now that I had a little bit more drive, because my first college experience, I went for computer science. And while I was good at computer science in high school, like AP computer science, I was not good at computer science overall. I could do it, but I was just not good at it. And then I realized, you know what? I think I should focus back on music. And that's when I took a step back, went to a nearby community college, and took my first music theory course. And that's what opened my eyes, was music theory. And I was like, oh, there is a whole method to creating music that I've been ignorant to this whole time. Mm-hmm. And I was so stoked to learn these things, be like, oh, so this is how voices interact and interweave, and you get those crunchy moments where you have that dissonance that resolves, and it's so good. And so that was kind of the eye-opening moment for me, was my music theory class at Weatherford Community College. And that's where I started playing, actually like learning how to read chord charts and understanding, theory for my instrument as well. My bass teacher there was very, very patient with me, because I'm not a great student when it comes to my instrument. I'm fairly late, but I find things that drive me, and I'll be able to get there. But it's like, I kind of take things at my own pace, unfortunately, which luckily all of my bass teachers were very patient, especially, Mr. Mulholland at UTA. He was probably the coolest bass teacher I have ever had. And back, and, I always worried there was going to be that one day where it's like, oh man, I just totally didn't practice this week, and I'm going to show up and he's actually going to be mad for the first time. And no, he's, I'd show up, and in the first 5 minutes, it happened one time. That's all it took. And it wasn't that he was mad. It's one of those like, oh, I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. And the fact that he could compose himself to where it's like, no, you just didn't do it. And, there's nothing to say about it. You don't need an excuse. You didn't do it, and just don't do it again. And I was like, yes, yeah, no problem. Okay. He's like, all right, get out of here and, go practice. And I'm going to spend my time doing something else. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
They'll do
music
it. Yeah.
music was something that was, instilled in me early on as being important. And, throughout being in choir through middle school, high school, my high school band, and then eventually coming back around to it and learning theory, it's kind of been there. And, maybe I turned away from it for a little bit for other reasons, but luckily music's one of those things you can always come back to, and it's there with open arms ready for you.
I can say that from the way that things have gone, you've gone in a very interesting route. From going from early on, you practiced from the very beginning, learning different instruments, focusing on one thing, improving on it even further, and to the point where now you are literally telling stories to like hundreds of thousands of people involved with your musical ability. In a narrative sense as well. Your storytelling and your music telling, of course, go hand in hand in that regard, and it's inspiring to go and hear that like it not only does music, but like storytelling in general has that sort of effect on people. And I think that's going to be one of the last things we're going to go and wrap up after a little bit. How is it that you've developed your storytelling sense, especially from like depending on taking things on the fly and working with others? Like I'm guessing there's some hand-in-hand stuff involved with like music creation as well, with like learning a creative outlet and working with others, especially in the group sense, and getting like your ideas versus what they have in mind, and working to create something cohesive and eventually creating like a show involved with it. Why don't you go ahead and talk about your work involved with like storytelling and like how that has improved and affected and changed over the course of the podcast, and from like early on when you first created these sort of things of being a DM and creating these stories?
Well, I always stand on I've already said it, but steal from your influences, take them, manipulate them, mash some together and make them your own. That, of course, is my first pillar that I will always stand on. Another thing is I spent a lot of time waiting tables and working in the food industry and retail industry, and learning what's the swearing bar here?
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, so learning how to bullshit is a very good skill. Whether it's just being able to keep in a conversation and kind of work your way through it and glean knowledge from the way people phrase things or stuff like that, from the syntax of a sentence. You kind of gain that understanding, but just being able to kind of, and that's part of it. Improvising is bullshitting, and to a degree, it's knowledgeable bullshitting. You are riffing off of something with maybe it's just a small bit of previous knowledge, or even secondhand knowledge, where it's like, oh, I've heard somebody talk about this, I think I could riff off of this and go down that path, and we'll see eventually. Maybe I'll find a path back to something I know, or maybe I'll just fall into a pit and have a little bit of a moment where I can be enlightened in a way, where somebody can tell me something that, hey, that's not actually correct, but this is. And those are those moments where you get to clear up your own ignorances and learn and grow as a person. So, which that is a big thing for me personally. I've done a lot of growing in my own right, since college, and just learning things about our world, and being able to skew my perspective towards understanding of other people's situations is something I feel is very important. That empathy that you can develop for other people is key, especially as a story writer, at least for me as a story writer, because nothing hits me harder than a moment that will bring you to tears. There are a lot of instances in the Adventure Zone that, I tear up, and like, maybe it's, it doesn't matter what the situation is, but it's just being able to feel that connectivity to the situation at hand. And whether you've experienced it or not is not necessary. But being able to, understand, like, wow, that's a pain that I can't comprehend. What is that character, or what is that person going through? Like, not being able to fathom the emotion involved in it creates an emotion in and of itself. The understanding and the want to understand kind of develops this other emotion. And, you know, again, it all ties back to empathy and being able to understand people's plights, or at least be able to hear them out, and, you know, trying to understand their pain. So that's one issue I have. Like, you know, I recorded a song recently with Allie for the most recent episode, and the lyrics in it, like, she banged out the lyrics so well, and they're so meaningful. Like, I mean, I had a hard time recording my vocal line for it because of the emotion in it. I'm like, okay, I'm choking up while recording it. And I'm crying while recording ukulele because I can hear the lyrics, and I know what it can mean to people as far as music goes and how people can relate to it. And I'm excited to be able to put out content like that. So as far as storytelling goes, I want to elicit emotion.
I think we're going to start to wrap things up. So speaking of crying, which is always a good thing to say.
Yeah.
Kyle, you have been one of the biggest inspirations for me as not only a storyteller, as a craftsman, as a podcaster, but as a DM itself. I've created a world based loosely on the stuff that you've made, taking inspirations, pocketing here and there. I've taken your advice of borrowing what's good, and if an all if an all bard multi-class campaign is not stealing it, then it's stealing it. I swear.
Go for it.
You are a great inspiration involved for that, and I'm guessing, hopefully you feel. I know now that you feel that sort of same emotion, but I could definitely be, as somebody who is able to talk to you, I could definitely feel it. I've teared up, I've cried, I've listened, I've laughed, I've loved with your with your story, with your characters that you've made, with the other people's everyone involved inside of that. I have adored their characters, the way that they interact with the world that you've made. Like, you have been a wonderful inspiration to, I'm guessing, tons of different people out there. Those who have listened, those who've listened to your music as well. All of that involved Lindby. Like, you are a part of something that is bigger than. I think that something that I've wanted to say is that I've always wanted to make something that's been bigger than myself. And in that regard, I definitely think that everybody wants to strive to go and be that. They want to create something and realize something that it's greater than just being just yourself. And any storyteller would love to go and hear that. And I must say that you've accomplished it by far. To your audience, you have done a grand job of doing so. You have been inspiration to plenty of different people, artistic wise, fan art wise. I've interviewed Rissa. She is somebody who I became a friend of because of this podcast. Like, there is
awesome.
there is just so much that you have given back to not only your community, involved with everything that you've done. You all have given a sense of you have grown yourself a community. You have grown yourself a story that tons of people have enjoyed and loved. And I'm so glad that as a fan, and I'm just so glad as a fan that I got a chance to go and talk with you and hear more about, like, the process behind how you got everything started, involved with your music, your early on creations, your everything you've done involved with, like, the campaign, everything. You have been. What I'm trying to say here at the very end is that you are one of. You're my favorite podcaster. You're my favorite bassist.
Thank you.
And you have been so successful in regarding of your mission of creating a story-driven making a story-driven campaign that thousands of people can listen to and enjoy and be a part of a world. You've done it, and I am so glad that hopefully you recognize and feel that you have created that.
Every day I pop on social media and I see what people are putting out as far as comments and fan art. You know, the fan art alone, the fact that people are taking their time, their talents, and they are, you know, bringing our story to life in an aspect is never lost on me. And it leaves me speechless more often than not. And I say that, I probably say that way too much, but it's hard to find words for something that, is that bewildering to me. I never in a million years, when we started this podcast, I never thought that we would be at the point that we're at. And to recognize that and see the community that we've developed and the people that are following us and giving us the praise like you're doing now, it means more than you can know to hear those things. So thank you very much. I want you and everyone else to know that it is never lost on the dedication that you are giving to us. And this is, I love doing this for you, and I love providing you this, entertainment or this respite or something that, allows you to, just take a brief moment away from whatever's going on, or being able to revel in it, whatever you need. And I'm glad that people can find enjoyment, solace, and whatever else that they get out of the show. It's phenomenal to me. So thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you not only to the hard work that you put involved with this wonderful story that you craft, but also to the Knicks and to Allie. If you're listening, hey, thanks for everything that you do
y'all.
involved with. Hey, how's it going? Thank you to you three as well for providing this wonderful story and this wonderful characters that you have personally developed and created your own. To make this, to make Chaos Sauce what it is, that it's always great to hear everything that all of you do. Everyone involved in this project is absolutely wonderful, and I must say, Kyle, thank you so much for coming on and letting me and talking about your history, the history of the show, and the history of the band. And everything involved with hopefully somebody has gained some new enlightenment from this episode. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a privilege. I appreciate you asking me to come on.
And I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Talk to you later.